Hi, and welcome to Visibility Unlimited and Visibility Unlimited Spotlight, the video portion to Visibility Unlimited, the podcast. I'm Leslie Short, your host and the owner of the Cavu Group. Our conversation today is going to be about the corporate secret. Shh, that's not a secret. And my guest, Laura Mignott. Did I say it right? Did I mess it up? I totally butchered it again.
Wow, you butchered it really bad.
Okay, we're starting over then. We're starting over.
Mignott, like
Mignott.
like
Really?
really.
Right here. Mignott. Okay, I'm starting over.
Editing is our friend.
Editing is our friend. Hi, and welcome to Visibility Unlimited and Visibility Unlimited Spotlight, the video portion to the podcast, Visibility Unlimited. I'm Leslie Short, your host and the owner of the Cavu Group. Today's topic is going to be about the corporate secret. Shh, that's really not a secret. And my guest, Laura Mignott, will be here to discuss. She has broken the secret. She is the secret that's not the secret in so many ways. She's an accomplished executive, a global chief experiential officer. She has a winning podcast. She's on multiple boards. She's on leadership committee. I can go on and on. She is really the epitome of an executive that has broken this secret. And what's our discussion today? It's about someone being dyslexic. And so, Laura, welcome.
Thanks, Leslie. It's so great to be on the show with you.
You know, I love having you. I always love having conversations with you. We had this conversation and it came out of just kind of left field when you were like, oh, no, I'm dyslexic. And listen, there's a whole different way I have to work and no one speaks about it. So will you share a bit about your background and when you discovered you had dyslexia? How do you break the code?
Oh, the code is it's not an easy one to crack. And for every single person who's dyslexic, and depending on the spectrum of dyslexia that you have, it will be different. Right. So, for me, I was always a really good student, straight A student. I was a really amazing storyteller. Should have been an indicator of what I'd be doing now, even a little kid. Because I could write stories really well, really quickly. Whenever you gave me a standardized test, it was a nightmare. I couldn't tell time on a regular watch. I had a hard time tying my shoes. And all those things originally, when I was in elementary school, they thought that I, might have some sort of developmental challenge. And my mom was like, no, she's smarter than all you kids. Just give her more work. So give me more things to focus on and write down, and I'll be awesome at it. And thank God for my mother for many, many reasons. But that allowed me to be very good in school, straight A's all the way through high school, except when I took standardized tests, like SATs, the nightmare. Right. It wasn't until I was about a sophomore in college and at NYU, and I'm with an intern at a firm, and my boss at the time, who is also dyslexic, says, Laura, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? I'm like, no, why? She's like, because you're literally doing the same thing I do. And I'm like, what's that? It's like, you were unbelievably good on the fly, but you get distracted. And when you write your emails, they're backwards. So basically, the first sentence is your last sentence. And I've noticed this. And I also sort of know that, you just need a little bit more focus to do things. But once you do them extremely well, and you pick stuff up very, very fast. Like it's very, those are my kind of quirks. They've always been my quirks. Like I just would handwrite every single note I ever had in school, memorize it, and then spit it back out. But if you asked me to read on that card, I would stutter into a billion pieces. Wow. But I memorized everything. So I read this book called Good for Dyslexia, and I was like, oh, that's my life.
Looks familiar. Sounds familiar.
It's all the things again that I thought were just my quirks. And again, my degree of dyslexia pales in comparison to some folks who have unbelievable trouble reading and sometimes speaking and processing information and some sensory issues. Like I am very, very lucky that that is not where my universe in dyslexia hits.
Right.
So for me, I've been able to thrive in different ways from other folks,
Okay.
but it still was very much a challenge for me because I literally cannot read off the slides. So as an executive, imagine like, I never read my slides. I memorize everything because if I look at it, the words start moving.
Okay.
So as a result of that, all my little quirks are like memorizing things, writing everything down, because when you write it in your hand, it commits to memory, or all this my kind of weirdly quirks, but that really began to help me see, oh, that's just how I have to learn. So, that's why you'll always see me with notebooks, like and notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. Because
Keep your stuff written down.
I have to write everything down.
Right.
And
it's funny that you say that. And sorry to cut you, because now I'm thinking about some of the people that I've worked with that are dyslexic. These tiny pieces of paper everywhere.
Everywhere.
And there's little notes, and I'm always like, how do you understand that? But
yeah, you'll never know.
Right. I'm like, please don't tell me to read any of this. But that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, but it's the thing. So I bombed my LSAT, for example. So I never went to law school. I bombed half of the GMAT. But the harder part of the GMAT is you have to make up your own essential like thesis, idea, and business case for something.
Right.
Perfect score. Because it requires short window of time, think, do. No, there's no distraction around it.
Right.
And for me, that was like, oh, okay. So for me, it's very much, don't give me 6 months to think about something. You want it done tomorrow, I'll do it right now. But if you give me 3 months, I'm gonna procrastinate the heck out of it. It's gonna be like stressful and crazy. So along the way in my career, I hid that fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just was like, oh, Laura always has notebooks. They're kind of funky. Yeah, but like I'm really writing every single thing down. Why doesn't Laura speak up a lot more? Because I was terrified of public speaking.
Right.
Because I would, like the few times I tried when I was in high school, I was a disaster and I traumatized the heck out of me.
So let me ask you something. Let me stop you there. But can you see it in your head? Or is it because you're memorizing it? Is it something that becomes visual in your head? And so that was the block of public speaking. Like as a dancer, I used to come from rehearsal. And if I can dance it in my head, I could dance it in my body the next day. But what was the correlation of that? Or do you not know?
It's memory. Basically, it's snapped into memory. Like if anyone's ever heard me speak publicly, I'm a completely different person when I speak. I'm just like extemporaneous and
Right.
Like I put on a show and it's like it comes from memory. Like it's not even like I rehearse it. It's just that I sort of know it. Like I can sort of blink and know that these are the words I need to say.
Okay.
And again, that's something that has developed over years. But in the early parts of my career, I was very terrified of letting anyone know there was something wrong with me because you're a Black woman in business, people are already kind of awful. And so I wasn't going to try and give them another reason to be awful to me.
Right.
Right. And so because like sometimes there's things that I sometimes just could not grasp and understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that I was like, I hated this because like, everyone take Laura off. Tell me I'm stupid. I will rip your head off.
No, absolutely. And no one should be saying that about anyone, regardless. But the reality.
I thought sometimes made to feel stupid because why don't I understand? And sometimes processing certain things are a little bit tougher for me. So it requires me to like read it over again, take a step, like read it again, read it without you over my shoulder. Right. Or break it up in little pieces. Like I used to do these little boxes where I would like put in keywords and stuff. Like, okay, it's really about this, it's really about this. I was always really good at those sort of like visualization things where you can like, so then I figure all that stuff out, but I needed my time to do it. This wasn't a group activity. Right. So oftentimes, why is Laura off by herself doing that instead of being part of the team? Like, yeah, because this is kind of how I have to understand this stuff. I will come back, but I needed to learn how to do that. And throughout my career, before I started my business, I hid that fact, and I just was like, I'm just really quirky and going to be by myself.
And it's weird because I see that, and I think automatically someone goes, "Oh, well, she's not a team player. She needs to go off on her own. Why isn't she here having this conversation with us?" And people did not know that was the way that you were processing it to execute it.
Yeah, It's like, and you know, you can find your way to navigate all the different pieces, but people have to give you the grace behind it. And I was in environments where I was not getting that grace. And so here's what ends up happening. You combine the thing of not being a team player, you're struggling to figure out this work, you're under very unrealistic deadlines. It creates an enormous amount of stress, and it can be unbelievably traumatic. And it made my first few years working in the advertising industry extremely challenging as a result of that, because I never felt comfortable to be. So hey, listen, just a thing.
Right.
Give me 5 minutes. Let me just go off and like think about this stuff.
So can I push back a little? Because
Yes.
I want to push back, because I want you to be able to share how you got there. Because you said you weren't giving grace, which I understand, but they didn't know to give you grace. And in the workplace, we don't give grace to anyone. And so that's the double-edged sword of this corporate secret, that they could be using someone as an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage on learning. So how did you finally say, I need the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever you needed?
It took well over a decade. It's like, it literally took over a decade. It took me having my own company, and it took me having to be on a talk. And so I want to say 2016, 2017, I was asked to give a talk about covering at a WPP event by the wonderful Judy Jackson. And she was like, hey, Laura, and she asked me for some speaker recommendations I'd given her a few. And she's like, oh, Laura, you can try to speak, because I bet you're covering that you don't use your accent anymore, because I was born in England and I used to have a British accent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I do, but like the thing I tend to cover is practically I'm dyslexic. It's like, you're dyslexic? I'm like, yeah, most people don't know this. And I've been deliberate about never talking about it, but maybe it would be helpful to talk about it.
Right.
I talked about, when I had my own business, I made my own rules. So guess what? I didn't have to worry about it.
Absolutely.
So I was able to sort of figure out my own ways, understand it, like, cut and paste became my friend on my emails. So like, write my email out, cut the last sentence, make it the first. It's 10 times a day. I probably have the same thing where I still write the sentence. Last sentence is my first sentence for my emails. They're also very short on purpose, because I know that is it's the focus for me.
I was just saying, you lose it after that. I know working with people, don't give them, because I made that mistake in the beginning, but we didn't know he was dyslexic. And I did my marketing plan, and I was so excited to go show my 14 pages. And he said, can you execute this? And I said, absolutely, but I'd like to take you through it. He said, well, then go do it. I don't need 14 pages. Give me the 3 bullet points you need, then go do it. And I was like, now moving forward, just give him the bullet points, and that's all is needed.
Cliff notes, please. Do not give me the Bible. I do not want to, because I'm not going to read it.
Right.
But that one talk about the things that I did, like how I was able to memorize, how I kind of wander off in the universe. But even with having my company now, like whenever I speak publicly, like I used to do a lot of public speaking, I'd memorize the questions. So I'd be interviewing people, and they wouldn't like, oh, how do you do the questions? Yeah, I memorize them, because I literally can't look at index cards, or I can't look at slides. So I talked about what that made me feel. And I talked about how freeing it was when I was an entrepreneur versus when I was an employee. Because when I was an entrepreneur, I was like, I'm just going to do things my way, so no one questioned it. And so no one ever asked. But the thing that I realized when I gave that talk when I was an entrepreneur was that the impact that people seeing me actually talking about this meant. And it wasn't until after that talk was over, and folks were really pleased, and a couple of Black women come up to me afterwards, and like one woman has like tears in her eyes, and I like viscerally never forget this. And she's like, you're the first person I've seen in corporate who looks like me, who has dyslexia. And it made me realize that there's probably hundreds
Yes.
of us who, what you think is angry Black woman, or she's just not being a team player, is that she's just dyslexic. And if you gave her the grace that you would give to somebody else who might have a different kind of neurodiversity, we'd be all so much better off. So I'm going to commit.
But it comes back to, we have to speak about it.
Yes,
we can't keep it a secret, because if we want the grace and we need the grace, we've got to let people know. And then that's right, it has to be treated like anything else.
It has to be. You have to treat it like anything else, and you give people this. We have to create the environment people feel comfortable to say these sorts of things.
Right.
And I think that was the first part about this. I never felt comfortable talking about it. Even as an entrepreneur, it took me being 8 years into being an entrepreneur before I finally talked about it. Because like, again, we have so many other challenging things about our universes, especially as Black women in business, that I don't need another thing that's going to be a knock on me. And I remember once I had a situation where I told someone about it and they used it against me for something. And I was like, you're gonna die.
Not cool.
Like, because like it was a cop out. Like they didn't get something they
Right.
wanted and they used that as the cop out. And I was like, that was extremely hurtful and made me sort of fall back into like 21, 22-year-old Laura who was just like so afraid to mention any of this stuff.
Right.
But then I realized it's like, what my mom always said is like, what's for you is for you, and for nobody else. And I was like, yep, I'm just gonna like take my lump and move forward. But I realized the importance of letting folks know that it's okay to talk about this sort of thing. I think the thing that has happened over the last several years as a result of, us all being stuck at home for COVID, more mental health awareness, more understanding of what neurodiversity is across the universe, and how there can be varying spectrums of that, and that neurodiversity is not just white dudes. I think a lot of times people think, oh, someone's neurodiverse, oh, they must be autistic, or they must have some sort of sensory processing issue. But that's the thing that happens to white men. It's like, no,
it's degrees, and it affects everyone. It's cultural. It's not cultural.
It is not limited to one group of people. It is not limited to one age group of people. It's not limited to one location of people. I think we are now. We look back at people you probably met. I mentioned some of these sort of my kind of quirks. You're like, oh, I used to work with someone who did that. You're like, oh, duh, now I get it.
Right.
And I think a large part of it is that a lot of, especially women of color, are not diagnosed. Like that same woman I spoke to at that event that time, she didn't get tested until she was in her mid-30s.
I feel like so many African Americans do not get, if they get tested, big F, it's not into their 30s. It's not till someone else rings the bell and says, have you looked into, have you thought about? Because again, it's not something that we speak about.
You don't speak about it because, again, I think sometimes, again, similar to how my feeling was, like you have enough as it is, and do I want to add something else? And I think you shouldn't view it as that. You should view it as you are as an employer, they are required to give you every accommodation they would give to anybody else who has any other neurodivergent challenge.
Absolutely.
And you should not look at that, and it should not be looked at as shame. It should be looked upon as a superpower, because here's something that's really interesting. I'm really good at my job. The reason I'm really good at my job is I know how to focus. I am really empathetic, which is also a thing that comes with being random levels of dyslexia, because I can read people really quickly. That's really handy in the people business. But more importantly is that like I know how to like get things done in a way that's to the point and efficient. There are loads of people out there who you probably think, well, they don't ever need anyone to tell them to do anything. They just know it naturally. It's like yes, that might be part of why they're able to do that, because they know how to focus. They know how to get to the point. They don't waste time with like the little minutia that would bog other people down, and they can get stuff done. Provide the environment where they can, one, feel comfortable to do that, and not be, well, you're not a team player.
Right.
Or this is like, what can we do here to give you the grace and space about that?
Well, I think if we start from the beginning, children, and and how we handle those conversations in school, how we handle testing in school, how we handle labeling our children, all of our children, but especially Black and brown children, how they get labeled so early on in their school. Like if we could shift that narrative there, then the openness of having a voice to be able to walk in and say, I will need extra 5 or 10 minutes for this test, and here is why, and this is what I can bring. Even as a child, by the time you get to an adult, you stand in your truthfulness.
It's absolutely true. And I think the thing is that like it cannot be looked upon as something that's making this child less.
Yes.
I think sometimes there are these environments where it's like, oh, they're making these child less. And I use my own story for this, because like when my mom went to my school, it was Laura needs other instruction. versus, oh, okay, these are sort of telltale. Like, I had the 3 telltale signs of a kid who's dyslexic. I couldn't tie my shoes. It's a big thing, actually, not being able to tell time. And also having a really bad stutter. Like, those are 3, after doing tons of research, lots of reading around this, those are 3 big telltale signs. But here's the other thing that was I was the best reader in my entire life. I like 8 books for breakfast.
Okay.
Like, I was amazingly good at math, like quick math things on, like, all those things. It's like, okay, well, it's not that this child may have something that's making her slower, it's that she's actually really fast. And so if that child is fast, that might mean some sort of gift,
Right.
or it might mean that fast here, challenging here.
Absolutely.
Like, that's not the way it was framed. And so my mom, because
moms,
American moms have no fear foolishness. We're like, no, give her more things to focus on, and she will do them. And like, so she can't tie her shoes, I'll get her Velcro shoes. To this day, my mom makes jokes at me because I allow my sneakers to slip-ins, because it's like, you can't tie your shoes.
I never wear sneakers. So. And I'm not dyslexic, but it comes back to, not only do we have to prep our young children, we also have to make sure the teachers and counselors are aware, because otherwise they will just say someone's either aggressive, or they're too slow, or they're not learning, or they're not focused.
Yeah, there's a great episode of Abbott Elementary, which is my favorite show on the planet. And there's the episode about the readathon, and it's about the girl who feels that like she's having a hard time reading. And so, but she like fakes the book count because she wants the class to win. Right. And when they bring the parents and like, hey, I think she might be having some trouble reading, the parents get very immediately defensive and kind of walk out. And the teacher, rather than like, well, okay, I throw my hands up, actually sits down with the girl and says, hey, listen, like, we all read in different ways. And here's my book from when I was a little kid. And here's how I was able to sort of figure it out. And like, and you'll find your way. And that was such a, it reminded me so much of my own experiences of like, if you find ways to help kids understand, they're awesome.
Right.
They're not less than that, like,
if they have a learning disability, and that's going to take away from them.
Yeah, it's not disabled as you're differently abled, and like, you can do things a little bit differently than everybody else, but it doesn't mean that you're any less than an awesome student. And like, giving people the, I remember me to talk about how everyone has to embrace how awesome they are. Like, right. If you do that from jump, that helps immensely for kids. And I know
it helps you as an adult once you come into the office.
Once you're in the office, I mean, I talk to my team all the time. I tell my team all the time, like, listen, like, you all would not be here if you were not awesome. But we all have different challenges, and I work with folks over the years who I can tell right away that they're such like, have you all been tested? And they're like, really? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah. And so I say it's me. I'm like, yeah, me, who's your boss, who's 10 years younger than you. Like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like, there are ways that we can help. Here's some things that work for me. If you want to get tested, if you need extra time for things, like, I make a commitment to be the boss that didn't have when I was growing up in business. So giving everybody the grace that they need, giving everyone the space and time they need, the prioritizing their health, their mental health especially, because I know that if you create that space for people, they will just thrive.
Absolutely. I was teaching, and I was so happy when this student came in. It was an adult class, and she came up to me and she goes, I don't know if I'm going to pass the test. And I said, we didn't even get there yet. We're on week 4. We have 4 more to go. Talk to me. I said, because I didn't like taking tests when I was younger, but I could tell you from back and forth the thing. I just didn't like taking tests. And she said, I'm dyslexic. I said, oh, so do you need more time? And she just looked at me. And I said, if you need more time, I will arrange more time for you. I have no problem with that. And she goes, you don't? I said, I want you to succeed. I think what you're doing is brilliant. If you're worried about taking a test, forget about the test, continue learning. If you need something else, let me know. And test day, we have time. She passed it because that stress,
yes,
even though she had it, it disappeared. And so we need to learn to speak up, and then when it's given to us, to give the grace and the time needed.
It's necessary. And I think the thing is, like, the damage that gets done when you don't have those supportive environments. Like, I can see it in that woman's eyes when I spoke to her. I can see it in my own self in terms of like how justifiably shook I was when the idea of going back to corporate would rear its head for me when I first started in my business. It's like part of the reason I kept my business going. It was like, I cannot go back to another corporate job because I will not feel comfortable. I will not feel like I'm treated that way. And interestingly, when I came to this role, that came knocking on my door, it was one of the first things I actually said to my CEO. I was like, by the way, from the very first, I think, so I'm dyslexic. So here's the thing. I'm probably going to present a lot. You are never going to see me read slides. So if that's going to be a thing, like, I'm going to tell you right now, I cannot do that. I will memorize slides and I will speak extemporaneously. You've seen me present. That's all from memory. I don't. So if there's like a corporate line I'm supposed to say, like, I'm probably not going to say it.
Unless I remember that one line, it's not going to happen.
It's a disclaimer. Yeah, forget about that. But I wanted her to know from jump that, like, that is my, like, because now I'm sitting in my truth of who I am.
Right.
I also I was in the power position, in control, and I'm able to be like, yeah, these are things I'm going to need. And it's like, yeah, I don't write long emails. I never write long emails. And like, just the things about how I approach things, where it's like, yeah, I don't always think 6 months and 18-month planning. Like, that's not my universe. Like, I can't. I'm in a business which allows me to do things every 6 weeks, basically. So,
exactly. That's a little creative thing, Laura. You think you should?
I built a job for myself that requires me to do that. Oh, gee, how'd that happen?
I want to bring this up because this conversation has been buzzing around. So I was actually happy that we're actually having this conversation again now. What's your thoughts on AI? Will it help those that are dyslexic, or do you think it will harm?
I think it's still too soon to tell. Early on, when ChatGPT first sort of hit the scene a few months ago, I saw an article where a counselor was helping his students in his entrepreneur program use ChatGPT to write their emails to their clients because they had trouble with English. And so they were able to write these emails and actually be able to facilitate business in a much better way. And I think that's actually an interesting use of the platform. And I think that's where we want to be. That if it is done with inclusivity in mind from jump, in terms of helping people to facilitate conversations and the ways of working better and more efficiently, that is a really good thing. Because again, there are some people who have immensely troublesome time writing emails, reading. So if there are ways that you can essentially there's a way we can utilize the platforms of AI to make that easier for folks, I'm all for it. The thing that concerns me is that everyone is acting as if the robots are coming and they're leaving behind and they're leaving anybody behind. And so what I want to see more of is as many diverse voices involved in the making of AI so that it learns to be smarter and as best as possible. So understanding, you've already seen some of the things that end up happening, like the language things that happen where you're it uses it can use some very bad AAVE to sort of a Black person. You're like, what in the world? So I think it's still too soon to tell as to whether or not it'll be good or bad. It asks for everything in tech.
Right. I'm torn where I think it will be extremely helpful for those with learning disabilities. But what I don't want it to be, and I'm someone that doesn't have a learning disability, so I can only speak what I see and not from experience. But what I am concerned about is, do we rely on that and the people don't get the skills to develop the way that you have had to figure out the best way to keep learning, and then it gets used as a tool taken away from learning. And
I think that it's as with everything. I think that when you provide lots of tools to make things easier, there's always a trade-off.
Right.
And, for a generation that is digital first,
Mhm.
they would have no idea what a phone book is, or an Encyclopedia Britannica. And on the one hand, that's cool because you can get information at your fingertips. Fantastic. The other hand is, if I have to actually go look into the phone book, I'm actually doing some thoughts.
Mhm.
If I have to look inside Encyclopedia Britannica, I actually have to read. So there's like critical context that comes from. And
Absolutely.
you see that it often happens in business right now, where the critical context of why you need to do X, Y, and Z is not happening amongst our younger generations because they didn't have to look anything up. It was just like, oh, it's right there. Here.
Right. Right.
And I'm
There's
like,
no why
yeah,
behind the why.
what's the why? Why is this awesome? Look, I had a recent experience about something, and I had to explain to someone, but why? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, that's why it gets there. I'm like, yeah, but why are you doing that?
Right.
Oh, but someone Gen Z told me. I'm like, okay, but does that Gen Z person actually work for a big company? Have they ever done anything around brand work? Like they wrote something that would make sense normally, but in the context of what you're doing, exactly why would I do this? Like, what is the why?
Yeah. That's where I get, especially with those with learning disabilities. I think it's going to be, I'm hoping it's going to be great. But then I think we're going to lose that human piece of interaction and context and the why behind the why.
Yeah, we keep losing a lot of as someone who's in the human business, because because like that's what we do every day, like the human to human connections things are missing. Like folks keep thinking we're doing this thing with their screens. It's like because look, we're missing something. You and I are sitting in two different cities right now, as opposed to be sitting in your living room, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and the thing that is missing with that, because of the outward thing that happens after, like, oh, if I was in Philly with you, we would go and like go grab a glass of wine somewhere, we sit down, we chat, and it extends the conversation.
Absolutely.
I think the thing for, especially for folks who may have some challenges of learning disabilities, is that like you need building closer ties and relationships opens up the doors for warmth, comfort, and grace. And if you are only in this transactional relationship where we're through screens, you don't get that extra bit of humanity. And I think that is the thing that's missing as we become so much easier connected around the globe, utilizing these technology platforms.
Wonderful. Laura, I know our time is almost up. I want to, always thank you for taking the time and having brilliant conversations with me. I want you to give our listeners or those watching maybe another nugget of how they can maneuver if they have dyslexia, or how they use their voice to advocate for themselves in business, being dyslexic. And then please let people know where they can find you.
Cool.
In the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Leslie. It's wonderful as always. My tip for folks who are dyslexic: tell people. I know it's hard. I know it's scary. But there is this thing about closed mouths don't get fed. And the world has changed. When I started my career 15 years ago, it was very scary. And I thought that like there was no universe where I would get any degree of response. Even I mentioned this. Now corporations, companies, brands, what have you, now this is part of their DEI bucket of services they have to offer. Like if this is something that you bring to the table that they must work with you on, they must make accommodations for you. Do not be scared to bring this up. You are part of basically a protected class.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, a protected class. And the only way that folks are going to be able to give you the space and grace is if they know what's going on. And again, and if you don't know if you're dyslexic, I would encourage you to test it. If there's so, like I said, I told you about this. We did this dinner a few years ago, and I talked about this whole idea around Black women and dyslexia to a table full of Black women. And I just like casually mentioned, oh, well, these are kind of things that I used to do. And half the table went, that is me. And these are producers, executives, accountants, blah, 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 blah. And if I'm in a room of 20 Black women and 50% of them are saying those are things that might have been part of my career, that tells me that numbers are significantly higher than anything we've ever seen out there.
Right.
So there's the book Gift of Dyslexia. I encourage you, if you're having trouble or you just want to say, I want to learn more, read that book. There are a number of ways you can get tested. Oftentimes you can check through your organization to see if you can get officially tested. If you've got kids who, again, my kind of quirks were like those tying the shoes and like the clock telling, but there's any number of other things that might be there. Like, it is not a learning death sentence. It is an opportunity for growth and giving people, again, those occupational services to help them as early as possible. Because as early as possible, if kids know this, the better off they're going to be. So please do that. And for me, you can always find me on social media. I'm Laura Mignott on every single platform. And I have the Reset podcast. It's also the Reset podcast on all the major platforms. And we interview amazing women like Leslie all the time, talking about business and how the world has changed. But Lindsay, thank you as always for your goodness.
Thank you. Thank you. And for all my listeners, for all those that are watching, thank you very much. As always, I say, if you are a leader, whether you're a leader in a corporation or owning your own business, continue to expand beyond your current culture. If you are someone that is out here and you are fighting for your rights to have a voice, always remember to expand beyond your current culture and share your gifts. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Keep listening.